Hello, everyone. Looks like most everyone from the waiting room has now joined. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started today. My name is Tori Nagash, and I am the Research Initiatives Manager at ACUHO-I. Welcome to our funded research webinar, What Do Students Want? Designing an LLC for LGBTQ+ students. As a little plug for our funded research grant program, you can visit the ACUHO-I website for more information, but this is a program that was created to support ACUHO-I's goal of cultivating knowledge resources for our members. And really the aim of this program is to encourage scholars and practitioners to conduct high quality research in support of ACUHO-I's research agenda areas of public-private partnerships, student outcomes, and student success. So with that, I will turn it over to our research team, who will introduce themselves and get started.
Thank you, Tori, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Chester Miller. I serve as Director for Residential Learning with University Housing at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina. So excited to be with you this afternoon, and again, thank you for being here.
Good afternoon. My name is Jamie Puglin, and I serve as the Associate Director for Assessment at Duke University. And thanks for being here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zini Opebu, and I am an Assistant Professor of Ed Leadership at Santa Clara University in Santa Clara, California. And I'm really excited to be here and get us started in this engagement about talking through LLCs for LGBTQ+ students. So to get us started, I want to first acknowledge that the lands that each of our institutions sit on do not belong to us. The lands that our universities occupy are the ancestral lands of the Takara, Eno, Tuscarora, Takaba, and Ohlone tribes. We honor these tribes today by recognizing that our institutions were built on land stolen from those who were here before the colonizers arrived. Additionally, these lands bore witness to over 400 years of enslavement, torture, and systemic mistreatment of African people and their descendants. We must acknowledge the history of these spaces and places we occupy to better understand and unlearn the ways that we have been socialized. This is particularly important during our session today as we talk about creating spaces for students that have historically been marginalized on our campuses. So to give you an overview of what we'll be discussing during today's session, today's webinar, we're going to just start by giving some program goals or some questions that we'd like you as the audience to be able to answer or take back to your professional practice at the conclusion of this webinar. Then we'll give some background information on the study that arose, the study from which these questions arose, and introduce the purpose and guiding questions that we used as we sifted through and analyzed the data, and give you an overview of the research methods that we use to answer these questions. And then we'll get into the juicy stuff, right? The findings or the considerations for planning LLCs for LGBTQ+ students. And then, of course, at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A, and we'll have some time to talk through some practical questions that we want to present to you all as well. So the goals of this webinar for our attendees to leave being able to answer the following questions. What might an LLC for LGBTQ+ students look like on your campus? What factors do you need to consider as you develop this LLC? And what resources or sources of support will you need to make this happen? So to give you some background on our research, so research has described LGBTQ+ students' experiences navigating campus climate, sense of belonging, and creating community. LGBTQ+ students often contend with stereotypes and microaggressions at the hands of their classmates, roommates, hallmates, and even faculty and staff at their institutions. And in addition to all these things, they're also expected to navigate these very gendered and traditionally heteronormative spaces. So all of these factors influence the way that LGBTQ+ students are able to develop a sense of belonging and create a sense of community on their campuses. In addition to broader issues within the campus climate, they also are expected to navigate residential halls, which are often very gendered and heteronormative spaces. Some of the challenges that are well documented in the literature regarding LGBTQ+ students in residence halls include challenging research that documents challenging relationships with roommates who are not accepting of their identities, and also other gendered spaces such as bathrooms that they are expected to navigate that can often be uncomfortable spaces for students who identify as, in this way. So in thinking about counter spaces that might be possible for this population of students, living and learning communities are found to have positive impacts on students' academic development, as well as their sense of belonging, and play a large role in students' abilities to create community on their campuses. Which brought us to this study. So we launched this study to explore the experiences and the impact of being in an LLC, particularly for LGBTQ+ students. And one of the missions of this program were to reimagine what an LGBTQ+ LLC would look like and how it could support students. So we used the following questions to guide this inquiry. What does being LGBTQ+ on this campus currently look like? How could being LGBTQ+ on this campus look if certain changes were made? And how would an LGBTQ+ living and learning community support students on this campus? So an overview of the methods: data were collected at a large research institution in the Mid-Atlantic region of the country. On this campus, over 30% of students are currently living in on-campus university housing. This campus also sponsors over 10 LLCs through housing and collaborations with different academic departments and campus centers. To collect data, we held a series of 10 focus groups in which a total of 64 students participated. Students were of diverse racial backgrounds and diverse academic classifications. We had a wide range of students who were in their first years, all the way to students who were in their final year at the institution. So the findings or considerations for planning. So 4 considerations emerged in our conversations with students. And these were things that participants wanted practitioners to pay attention to as they were thinking about building an LLC for LGBTQ+ students. So we'll highlight each of them now. So sense of belonging. Students emphasized how support and different inclusive practices contributed to sense of belonging on their campuses, and how an LGBTQ+ LLC specifically would play a role in facilitating sense of belonging. So students believe that this LLC would address larger issues of exclusion on their campus, as this would be a space where students would feel welcomed and included. Many students commented that their room was a space where they felt most comfortable and most safe. And an LLC would be a good opportunity to affirm students in an inclusive environment and create more spaces where students could feel affirmed and safe. This space might also be a place where students felt that their identities were affirmed and supported instead of challenged, excluded, and unsupported. Being in community with students who shared their similar identities and experiences was particularly of note. Many students talked about possibly not feeling like they were the only one, or feeling as if they did not belong because they did not see themselves in their peers within these residential spaces. And then students also talked about the importance of creating spaces for students who held intersectional identities, intersectional marginalized identities within the LGBTQ plus community. So an LGBTQ plus LLC must consider and create spaces and opportunities to build community across intersections of these identities. So some of these issues related to sense of belonging were captured best in student quotes. This quote reads, "When I was looking for LLCs, I was also looking for one anywhere specifically related to being queer or, you know, being in the community, and not seeing one was a little bit disappointing. I definitely think that it's something that we probably should consider and need on the university level, because I definitely think it's one thing to be in the LGBT community and, you know, choose to go to the LGBTQ center and choose to walk all the way out of the way in order to see, you know, see another gay person. And I think it would be really cool for the university to say, hey, we know you guys are out there and we know you guys want to find community. Here's one for you. Here's one where you can, you know, surround yourself with people who identify the way you do and people who you can connect with." So this quote really captures students calling on their universities to create intentional spaces where they could be in community with each other, instead of spaces so that they would not have to leave the comfort of their rooms, the comfort of these places where they call home, in order to search for community that they may or may not find at the campus center dedicated to LGBTQ plus students. Another consideration was staff and training. So students talked a lot about the need for staff diversity and representation, particularly having staff who identified themselves as LGBTQ+, having staff who held intersecting an LGBTQ+ identity, as well as another intersecting marginalized identity. Race in particular was brought up a lot. And then also participants talked about their willingness to have, or their openness to having staff who identified as allies to the LGBTQ+ community. In addition to what the staff should look like, students also talked about what kind of training they felt was important for staff to have. So some types of training that they brought up were having mental health and counseling training, acknowledging that mental health issues are very prevalent within the LGBTQ+ community. They also mentioned having trainings related to inclusive language and inclusive practices. For example, students talked about how within their current residence halls, it was really meaningful to them that their staff acknowledged the importance of preferred pronouns. And that was something that they had their preferred pronouns was something that they had hanging on their door. So in seeing that visibility affirmed for the student that it was okay and appropriate to use inclusive languages and practices in that space. And then something else that students talked about was the need for adequate sexual health training and education so that staff would be able to talk through some of those issues with students in the same ways that we expect staff to talk about these issues with students who identify as cisgender and heterosexual. So again, this student quote also captures how the importance of staff, having certain staff and certain training for staff. This quote reads, "I think having an intersectional as possible staff would be very good. I don't really know how you would fix problems within the community based on race or sex or whatever. So I think having staff who are in charge of fixing these problems, who experience these problems, would be better equipped to handle them, and not even from training, just from their own day-to-day lives. They would know better than anyone who went through any type of training and how to handle these issues. Yeah. So I think as many people of different races and genders and abilities and nationalities and have different experiences and backgrounds as possible to be equipped with dealing with any issues that may arise from students." So this quote really captures the importance of having staff with very diverse backgrounds and lived experiences so that they could speak directly to what students were experiencing, both within the residence halls, but in their day-to-day lives and interactions with people across campus. So the third consideration was resources and programming. So students wanted to see how the village would connect to existing resources that were present on campus and also provide resources that were not currently or widely available on their campus. So many students mentioned the importance, in regards to programming, many students mentioned the importance of just doing things together, no matter what the purpose or focus of the activity was. So talking about connecting to resources, students talked about connecting and collaborating with other campus centers, such as the cultural and race-based student centers, the Women's Center, and also campus resource centers that dealt with counseling and student health. Again, acknowledging that these are issues that are particularly significant within the LGBTQ+ community. Students also reiterated the importance of addressing intersectionality, particularly the intersections of holding a marginalized racial and LGBTQ+ identity. And they talked about how this can be addressed through programming, mentorship, and different kinds of support and resources that were offered within the LLC. Then as conversations shifted to talk about community building and social programming, students suggested events like movie nights, book clubs, getting to go to the local LGBTQ+ events in the local community surrounding their campus, and also volunteering for organizations that aligned with students' social interests, social issues, and social justice interests. And then the idea of having a linked course was also brought up as well. Some ideas that students had as far as what this course might cover are exploring the significant moments of LGBTQ+ history, as well as topics in gender studies and how the LLC could contribute to the academic development of students in that way through this linked course. So this student quote reads, "I think aside from doing special stuff during Pride Month and stuff like that, I don't think you necessarily have to make it a huge focus for everything to be LGBT centric. Like you could just have like, hey, Avengers Endgame is coming out. Let's all go watch that. That could be a normal program or something. It doesn't have to be like the gays are going to watch Endgame, but we are. I mean, I think just having normal college student programs that just don't have to be LGBT centric, because that's the way that you can isolate yourself, especially if you are like me and you don't want to be recognized only as a gay college student. You want to be a college student first, that sort of thing." So this quote in particular captures how students talked about having events such as movie nights and book clubs to emphasize that they are a student first, and they're a student who happens to hold this identity, but this identity is not all that they are. So creating programming and resources that nurture other aspects of the student's identity, not just the LGBTQ+ identity that they hold. And finally, safety and concerns was our fourth consideration or finding in this study. So safety was a very high priority for students when considering developing an LGBTQ+ LLC. Students referenced many factors and how they could jeopardize the safety of participants within the LLC, and also discussed how to make this LLC as inclusive as possible by preparing staff to work with and support the different identities within the LGBTQ+ umbrella. So some safety concerns that arose in our conversations included those related to where would this LGBTQ+ LLC be housed. Students talked about wanting it to be housed in a building that was central to campus so that they would be close to their classes and other campus resources. But they also talked about wanting to be central so that it wouldn't feel like their university was isolating that isolating them to some far, far away part of campus as a way of hiding LGBTQ+ students away from the greater campus community. They also talked about location in regards to being visible to students or community members who did not feel like such a space should exist on their campus. So they talked about concerns related to the LLC being targeted for hate crimes, and suggested that certain security measures be put in place to mitigate the potential threat of ignorance or hate crimes that might be directed towards students within the LGBTQ+ community. They also addressed being placed with roommates who might not be a good fit for them, particularly roommates who were not accepting of the identities that they held, or possibly having a preference of wanting to be in a room with a student who shared their identity or shared a similar identity to them. So one of the things that they suggested were designing roommate matching systems so that they could specify, this is what I imagine my roommate relationship looking like, and staff could consider those decisions as they were placing roommates together. Bathrooms was also a major concern that was raised in our conversations. Students wanted practitioners to consider the implications of communal bathing spaces, particularly in hall-style residence halls. Some students may not be comfortable in this arrangement. So related to location, students felt that it was important that staff consider placing an LLC like this in a building that had multiple bathing options available, particularly single shower stalls or similar options if those existed on campus. Students also talked about how being in an LGBTQ+ LLC would effectively out them to other students and their families when whenever they came to visit during move-in or during family weekends that might take place on the campus. So some of the suggestions that arose were to create opportunities for students to choose how engaged they would like to be in the LLC programming, or even choose within what proximity they would like to be within the LLC. So for example, if the LLC was in a building that had 5 floors, maybe the first 2 to 3 floors are where the LLC is housed, and then students who are not out being placed on the floors where floors 4 and 5, so that they could still be in proximity to take part in the events and programming, but it would not be a direct relationship. It would not be a direct relationship to the LLC, and they could choose how much, if at all, they wanted to engage with the different programming. So some student quotes, the first of which captures the significance of bathrooms. There needs to be more than one single occupancy bathroom in the entire residence hall, because most of the residence halls on this campus have one for the entire building. If you have more than one person, which you probably do, who would like to use the bathroom, that can be a problem. And very few have showers. Like almost none of them have showers that are single occupancy. So again, stressing the importance of having multiple bathing options available for students who are uncomfortable with, communal bathing spaces. And then finally, another quote about the significance of the location of this village, or of this living and learning community. This student says, I think it's important to be on Central Campus because it's the Pride LLC. So they should be proud to be an LLC. It's really hard to do that if your LLC isn't in a place where people will see it. But it also seems like it could be more prone to something like any kind of hate crime if it's further away. So in this quote, the student captures the importance of the university placing this LLC in a space that is visible to affirm that students within this LLC belong, but also capturing the relationship between the location of the LLC and the potential threat of hate crimes and just general ignorance directed at the population of students. So although we have these 4 Major considerations, there were a number of honorable mentions. The first of which was building style, which is very much related to that final safety and concerns finding. So suite style, apartment style, and hall style all have very different outlooks on communal spaces, bathing spaces. So that was something that students brought up in our discussions a lot. The size of the LLC was also brought up many times during our discussion, specifically how many students should be in this LLC. Should it be one that is smaller and more intimate, or should it be larger so that more students could engage? And then related to that is academic classification. Should this LLC allow first years or just upperclassmen second year, or upper class persons second years and beyond? What might that look like at your institution? And then finally, the application process, namely how to vet students who genuinely want to be a part of and engaged with this LLC versus students who may be performing so that they can get into the LLC because they need housing, or students who may be performing so that they can get into the LLC for reasons that are not pure and intentional, for reasons that may be to distract for the mission and purpose of this LLC. So these were some of the things that came up, not as often, but were still very prevalent in our conversations. So to wrap up, we want to pose just a few questions to our audience to help guide your thinking about what an LLT for LGBTQ+ students would look like on your campus. So the first question being, what does visibility look like on your campus currently, particularly for LGBTQ+ students? And how would an LLC contribute to this visibility? What does training and education look like for faculty, professional, and student staff on your campus? After hearing about student concerns and experience today, how would you change or develop a staff training program for an LGBTQ+ LLC? And what are some obstacles that you would have to overcome to bring in LGBTQ+ LLC to your campus? And that concludes our presentation. Thank you. I'll keep this up. Actually, I'll move back to the critical questions. But yes, I'd like to open the floor for questions. You can either respond or try to think through some of these questions. You can unmute yourself, respond in the chat, or you can pose a new question that may have come up as you were listening to this presentation. Yes, Leslie. Actually, I'm going to copy and paste this.
I was just wondering, the students that were in your group, were they actually in the LLC, or were they just speculating what that situation would be like? Was anybody actually had experienced that LLC before?
Yeah, so this campus, the research site doesn't currently have an LGBTQ+ LLC. So one of the things that we were examining is what would it look, if there were an LGBTQ+ LLC, what would that look like? So essentially students were speculating what might this LLC look like if it did exist on this campus. What would we want it to look like? What would we want staff to look like? What might programming look like within this space if it existed on this campus? So they were speculating, yeah. They were imagining in a perfect world, what might this space be for us?
Thank you.
And just to add to that, we did ask this of students who were currently in LLCs. So half of the population that participated in focus groups were participants in other LLCs on campus. So they kind of knew how that worked, and then half weren't. So we kind of got everybody's feedback.
Yeah, Tyler.
So I see a couple questions in the chat, but I work with LGBTQ+ LLC at my current institution. And when it comes to like the not outing piece, kind of our protocol has been, we do allow students to have a preferred name through our software system, and that's what RAs use to create their door decks and stuff like that. But we also recognize that while they might identify a certain way with the university and throughout the systems there, family might be moving them in on move-in day, and that might not necessarily align. So we try to offer up, we send them an email saying, hey, if for some reason that differs from like what you want your family to see, like we can have a different door deck up there, or we can wait to put it up, like totally up to you. And then when it comes to like different kind of designations for like visibility on door decoration stuff, we leave it up to the students of what they feel comfortable putting on their door specifically. While we do have some banners and whatnot, we don't necessarily put anything up in the hallway showing like this is like the LGBT wing or floor. I think it's just kind of something that students know, but it kind of gives them that ease of like not putting a huge target on them, because it is part of a broader community and doesn't allow for a whole lot of questions to be asked during move-in and whatnot. But we haven't run into too many issues around that so far.
Tyler, this is Carla Hines from UNC Charlotte. I'm just curious, what university are you from again?
Oh yeah, I'm at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. So it's one of the nation's oldest LLCs for LGBT students, if not the oldest. I've heard we're the oldest, but someone might contest that. So.
And so just to be clear, in your LLC, they're not co-located in one particular hall. Are they spread out, or how is it? I'm not sure I caught that.
Yeah, they're all in one wing of a community. The other side of the hallway is gender inclusive housing. So there are other folks who might not necessarily want to be like part of like the full robust curriculum, and might not also be even like identified within the LGBT community, because gender inclusive, it goes kind of beyond that, but often draws a very similar audience just by the nature of it.
I appreciate that. And the reason I asked that question, I'm located in Charlotte, North Carolina. And here, for those of us Southerners, it's a bit challenging, but my gender inclusive housing includes the way that we were able to present this as an option is individuals who really want to live with gender affirming individuals. Now, in the state of North Carolina, as a state institution, we are required to house individuals by legal sex. So I still have individuals who are legally female, assigned with females, et cetera. But then there's a whole different gender identity spectrum that we have going on out there. And so I was drawn to this presentation because I was curious if anyone in the Southern schools, particularly, I think, Chester, you're from North Carolina State, is that correct?
Yes, I am, Carla.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to know I'm just curious how some of the other Southern schools, some of the Bible Belt schools are doing.
Yeah, as you know, Carla, I mean, being in the state of North Carolina, we've had our challenges. And, we work, I think many of us are probably already doing this. It's important to have conversation, particularly with our folks on our assignments team. How do we navigate that? Those are the folks who actually have the collateral responsibility for helping us with assignments. And two, we have campus partners that are involved in that conversation. In particular, our LGBTQ Center office engage early, and that's the important thing. Recognizing that the restrictions that we have at the state level, being a system school, a lot of the charge and restrictions that we're under, impacts all 16 system schools. So we navigate it with conversations and doing the best that we can within the restrictions that we have, and letting students and parents know if they're involved in the process upfront, being transparent, open, and honest about what we can do, handling students and their needs with care, and doing the best that we can to meet their accommodations.
Thank you.
A question in the chat about having one faculty or staff member overseeing the LLC. Does anyone have suggestions for recruiting an LLC partner? Or have you had struggles with pinning down that one person who might be the person to oversee that?
Yeah, so I have that responsibility here at North Carolina State University. In my role, I provide leadership and oversight over our Living Learning Community program. We have 15 Living Learning communities here at NC State, and we also have several special interest groups. Special interest groups for me and for my department are groups of students that we've entered into agreement with the campus partner office that haven't, may want to aspire to living learning community status, but really maybe want to try some things out and have their students live together in a community, and they kind of work with us. The difference for that group versus a living learning community here at NC State is that they don't receive the same type of resources, if that makes sense. They're essentially just living together in community and wholly supported by the campus partner and not by the team that I have within my area. It is important when thinking about either starting living learning communities or supporting and nurturing living learning communities moving forward, that either housing or one entity is not the sole owner of the responsibility for growing, developing, and nurturing that program and supporting the students in that program. One of the challenges that I think that we have as a profession is there's no one size that fits all. Every campus and environment really has their own unique approach to starting and supporting these communities. Although many of us subscribe to Karen Inglis's best practices, but even in the text and the literature, there are a lot of different ways to kind of go about establishing these communities. What is critically important, though, is that you have folks around the table early on in the process to be involved and share in the governance and the responsibility for supporting the program. We do recognize, so here at the NC State, for example, the lion's share of the resources and support come from university housing. I have my own team of LLC directors that support these programs. They either report directly through me or in collaboration with other offices on campus, have a dotted line to my leadership, and we support those programs. I can go down a rabbit hole of talking about articulating agreements, memorandums of understanding, and the whole process for creating living learning villages. On some campuses, including here at NC State, we have what's called a board of directors or an advisory council that kind of supports, has an intimate stake in the success of each of the living learning communities. And so they come together and talk about and provide indirect oversight, if you will, to ensure the LLCs are meeting their mission. So I don't want to take up a whole lot of the conversation, but Kirsten, I might have some resources, and you and I can touch base offline to talk a little bit more, and I'll extend that to anyone on the call who want to talk a little bit more about that. And I'll drop my email in the chat, and obviously it's on the presentation slide to talk further. Trevor, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Trevor Heeham. I'm working at University of Connecticut right now. I've been working with the gender inclusive housing community here for the past year and a half. And Chester, it almost goes exactly to what you were saying with, we're not a living learning community. We are just like a special interest housing. So some of the drawbacks are like, yes, we're not like as embedded into that culture of the LLC office. There's not like a particular staff member whose job it is to like really support programming. It's really fallen on like the hall directors to do that. which is interesting. But it also can have its benefits sometimes too, because, you know, I've talked with some of the RAs like, yo, like, what do y'all think about like turning this into the LLC? And there's a lot of people who are just like, honestly, I just want somewhere where I can like live and go to the bathroom and not need to like take a class and do all this programming attached to my learning environment. So I think there are like some pros and cons there to like really thinking about like, do we want this to be special interests that people can just like live with whoever they want and use a bathroom, or are we trying to like take it to that next level of the living learning community? I just appreciate, Chester, you sharing and wanted to highlight how there are like pros and cons to both of those situations.
So Chester, I went to your website. Do you have a gay and lesbian LGBTQ plus LLC in NC State?
No, we don't. We actually, long story short, pre-COVID, and also pre some strategic changes within our department and within Campus Partners, we initiated conversation about establishing a LGBTQ focused living learning community here at NC State. We've paused for a variety of reasons. There's a lot of turnover across higher ed and student affairs, and we've been significantly impacted here at NC State. And so we've not moved forward with those conversations yet. Actually, the LGBTQ Center has their director position posted now. So there's been some turnover in that shop, as well as some other partners that are intimately connected in the path forward to realizing that community. So, but we do have students who are interested in living in that community once it's established.
Does anybody here have a LGBTQ plus LLC?
This is Leslie from Western University in London, Ontario, Canada, and we do have the LLC. We consider it, previously it was considered an interest-based LLC, so there was no faculty component, no faculty member overseeing it, any of that. We've kind of moved away from labeling it as an interest-based because really it's essentially a person's element of who they are is not what they're necessarily what they're interested in. So we've kind of removed that label. It's been successful. It's been growing. We actually came up for review this year whether or not we would drop it from our list of LLCs, and we've kept it along with our Indigenous and Ally LLC. So those are the two. All of our other LLCs are faculty based. So we do have, it's been successful, and we've continued to go through with that.
Yeah, kind of to echo Leslie, this is Kirsten Hooks. I'm at Western Kentucky University. We do have an LGBTQ community we call Stonewall Suites. We've had this community for quite a while, and it's really grown. We have about 60 students in it now. Currently, it's interest-based, but we do, that's why I put the question in the group. We're looking at partnering with the academic side of the house to have a partner come in to potentially teach a history course for all of the students, kind of as an optional course, but especially for the freshmen that are coming in, to be able to take that course and have kind of an LGBTQ lens on that history course. So that's kind of where we're at right now. So I was curious if anyone else requires a course for their LLC.
Similar to Kirsten, we, hi Kelsey, she, her pronouns. I'm at University of California, Riverside. We do have a living learning community, an LGBT living learning community that we also call Stonewall, and it is in a suite style residence hall. But we also have a more like, we don't really call it special interest, but we also have just gender inclusive housing that is not an LLC. And we're looking at putting them kind of in buildings next to each other so that maybe students that don't feel super comfortable living in an LLC with attached programming because they're worried about being outed could still attend those programs in that LLC without living in it. So I guess that's just an added layer that we've considered over the years. And we worked very closely with our LGBT RC to kind of mitigate a lot of those privacy and safety concerns with our students. We were dealing with a lot of the same issues of worrying about move-in and displaying that it is an LGBT RC or an LGBT LLC, et cetera. So.
So I was gonna, I was in the middle of typing a response in the chat, but I think I'm just gonna say it because it's too much to type. Specifically as it relates to linked courses, one of the challenges that we have sometimes at NC State is with our living learning communities that are not closely linked or tied to an academic college. Is that linked courses don't often count towards their degrees, and recognizing when a lot of students are now, we have first year students that coming in with so many credits, they tend to not have a lot of wiggle room in the ability to add courses that don't count for their degrees. And so here at NC State, we're reviewing all of our linked courses for our living learning communities, in particular those living learning communities that are not academically connected. They could be themed, interest-based, or what have you, just to make sure that we are exploring ways to make sure that those courses may count for a general ed requirement that helps students fulfill their academic requirements as well.
One of the things, and I keep coming back, we struggle with LLCs with an academic component, regardless of the area. It just doesn't, getting the commitment from faculty and staff, no matter what the topic is, no matter what the area of interest is, we really do struggle. And so I really wanted to hear, because we're looking at some changes with our LLCs, and I really wanted to hear some of the great outcomes that have occurred that you've seen in your population because of an LLC for LGBTQI plus, or some of the challenges that you're struggling with, because as forward thinking as I may be, if I don't have the resources to really shore it up, I don't want to go out there. But I think it's, in concept, I think it's a great idea, and that's what I'm struggling with. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to come and hear from you guys, some of you who are already doing it.
This is Veronica from University of Connecticut. So again, we have gender inclusive housing. It's not an LLC because it doesn't have a linked academic component. We're very fortunate when it comes to our LLCs that the academic department that works and recruits faculty is quite convincing. So we don't necessarily, for our LLCs, we're very fortunate to have that handled by a group of rigorous go-getters. So we don't necessarily have to worry so much about our partners when it comes to things like that. However, for gender inclusive, we used to have a more productive partnership with our Rainbow Center, our LGBTQ center on campus. They've had some staff turnover, and then the restrictions the university put in place to make COVID precautions happen made it very difficult for us to work with them for the past couple of years. So we've lost some of our not required, but certainly supportive programmatic components. That's historical knowledge. I wasn't here prior to COVID, so I don't have personal experience with that. On the other hand, it's a very popular option. Our students overflowed our space this year. We're traditional halls, and we ended up taking over a couple of suites to accommodate all of the folks that wanted to be enrolled in our space, and we're moving to a larger environment next year to accommodate that. as well as adding a floor that's going to be gender neutral to provide a little bit of a buffer space in terms of folks who don't care what gender their roommate is, but aren't part of the community that really needs the gender inclusive support. So we are a growing community that does seem to be working well. And it seems like maybe you can't hear me. I'm sorry, I'll speak up if I have to talk again.
I wanted to quickly go back to Carla's comments, in regards to the challenges in particular with your academic LLCs. And Carla, please correct me if I'm wrong, but we have the opposite challenge here at NC State. Our academic LLCs are some of the strongest programs I've seen in a very, very long time. And in fact, our partners are so intimately involved in the day-to-day and strategic direction of the LLC that in some regards it's been challenging to centralize best practices. Does that make sense? Before my role was created as Director of Residential Learning, each of our LLCs were really, they operated as more of a siloed program under the umbrella of university housing. But in my role as initially as Director of Living and Learning Initiatives, my sole position's existence was to standardize practices of our living learning communities across NC State's campus. And part of that was identifying best practices. I spent a lot of time making the rounds with folks about Karen Inglis's best practices model and kind of using that as our triptych for those who remember triptychs back in the day to help us launch in the same direction, to make sure that students, no matter which LLC they were participating in, were getting the quality of experience they deserve. Here at NC State, students don't pay to participate in our LLCs, it's all free. We want students to have the access because we vehemently believe in the outcomes and students' ability to participate in high impact practices like a residential learning community. So we're headed in that direction, but it's been a challenge for us to get the academic partners to agree on what that standard practice or build consensus on the standard practice for running this LLC. Our students are enormously engaged in our academic LLCs. We have very large communities here. Our largest community is our exploratory studies living learning community. It's close to 700 students, which is massive. Our engineering living learning community is being proposed to go as high as 650 students with the expansion of the incoming engineering cohort that's happening in the state of North Carolina. So our academic partners are significantly engaged. It's those non-academic partners that I think where the challenge exists. At NC State, for folks on the screen who might be at institutions outside of the state, North Carolina State University is a STEM school, so engineering is our flagship college. So anything dealing with STEM, textiles, and College of Veterinary Medicine, those colleges, even College of Humanities and Social Sciences here at NC State, super popular programs, but engineering really carries the flag for our institution. And so those, but academically, those programs are very well supported in every sense of the word. Our identity-based and theme-based living learning communities is where there can appear to be some inequitable support from our campus partners, just from everything that's happening, as a result of the impacts of COVID, the mass exodus from higher education, and just folks being just worn out and fatigued. But again, I'm happy to talk with folks offline if they want to learn more about our programs, and also happy to share any resources that I might have as it relates to living learning communities that I've used here at NC State.
Question in the chat from Paige. Are faculty, staff that are involved for LLCs compensated for their participation, or is this a volunteer-based commitment? How frequent are classes, seminars, if there is a linked class to the LLC?
Here at NC State, and I'll chime in, and hopefully other folks have examples. Here at NC State, I have a team of professional staff members whose sole day-to-day responsibility is running the LLC. They are full-time postmaster, PhD level professionals who were hired under quote unquote as subject matter experts. They know, so we have a living learning community for honors and scholar student. We have someone we hired and serve as the LLC director whose background experience is all about high achieving students, honor students. Our engineering living learning community director is finishing PhD in mechanical engineering. So it depends. And then also we have faculty members who teach living learning courses that we've written articulating agreements with their department to get a course release, and we pay them a certain amount of money to teach a section or 2 sections of a course, depending on what the credit weight of that course is. And just in range, a couple of the course release buyouts that we have right now are in the range of about $5,000 for someone to teach us a course for us, for a link course.
Thank you for that. I think we've worked on a much smaller scale where I am, because we're kind of an offshoot of the University of Toronto over in Mississauga. So a lot of the faculty-based stuff that we've done has been kind of just on a volunteer-based, not specifically for LLCs, but we have like a peer academic leader assigned to each student in residence as well. So those are kind of grouped more by academics, and it's more bringing someone in once a semester just to kind of connect with the students.
Not seeing any more questions in the chat, but I'd love to turn it back to our research team here, presenters, if they have any final thoughts or anything they'd like to share before we wrap up our time together.
Just in closing, just want to thank everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us, to hear about our research and our work. If there's anything that you've heard that kind of speaks to you and the direction that you're looking ahead on your campus, feel free to reach out to any of us. Zini, Jamie, or myself are happy to connect with folks offline. If any of you are familiar with the knowledge community in ACUHO-I, the academic initiatives knowledge community, I'm also, I have posted in there quite, a few times as well. So happy to connect with folks offline any way that you see fit. So reach out.